Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the ISAP thematic track 11, Transformative Actions for Nature Positive Society from SATOYAMA Initiative towards 2030. My name is Koji Miwa, policy researcher from IGES, and also a member of the Secretariat of SATOYAMA Development Mechanism, SDM in short. In this session, we will discuss how we can facilitate transformative change for nature positive society to happen by 2030 through the cases of the SDM project, which apply a landscape approach, socio-ecological production landscape and seascapes, or SEPLS. First of all, we would like to welcome two prominent speakers for the opening remarks. First, we have a recorded message from Mr. Okuda Naohisa, Director General, Nature Conservation Bureau, Ministry of Environment, Japan.
Thank you for kind introduction. It is an honor for me to address at the opening of the session. First of all, I'd like to express my sincere thanks to Professor Takeuchi, President of IGES, and Mr. Watanabe, Director of IPSI Secretariat, and all their staff for organizing this important webinar. As you all know, the part 2 of CBD COP15 will be held soon in Montreal for 2 weeks from December 7th. At this conference, it is expected to adopt the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. In 2010, the government of Japan hosted CBD COP10 in Aichi, Nagoya, and adopted current global framework, Aichi Biodiversity Targets. During the COP10, our Ministry of the Environment, together with the United Nations University, proposed SATOYAMA Initiative to the international community, and we jointly launched an international partnership, IPSI, with other 51 relevant organizations. Since then, we have supported the IPSI Secretariat, and we are very glad that IPSI has evolved into the partnership with 292 members with all of your cooperation. Among many activities that IPSI has been promoted, I'd like to highlight one collaborative program that is SATOYAMA Development Mechanism, or SDM. SDM was established jointly by IGES, UNUIAS, and our ministry in 2013, and has supported the field activities of IPSI members and organizations through financial assistance as a program of seed funding. Through this seed funding, the SDM encourages IPSI members to create innovations and best practices and to integrate governance and knowledge, particularly indigenous and local knowledge, as well as to mobilize people, partnership, and resources. IPSI programs such as SDM also contribute to the individual efforts of the Aichi Biodiversity Targets through an integrated landscape approach. It has made great contributions to the conservation and sustainable use of socio-ecological protection landscapes and seascapes, SEPLS. We believe that what IPSI has been achieved so far will provide useful knowledge to implement the expected post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. For example, at COP15, we are very keen to agree on the 30 by 30 targets, which aims to conserve at least 30% of land and sea areas in the world. But we understand one key of this target is how we can promote to create the other effective conservation measures, OECMs, other than the traditional protected areas. In that context, a certain part of the areas conserved under IPSI programs or based on the concepts of a SATOYAMA Initiative will be sure to be recognized as OECMs. Therefore, it is expected the past experiences of SATOYAMA Initiative will be required more than ever in the future, especially for the implementation of the new Global Biodiversity Framework. These will lead to the realization of our vision, a world of living in harmony with nature, or a nature-positive society. That is the theme of this session. In that sense, the strengthening of the synergy between climate change and biodiversity, which is the main theme of ISAP 2022, is also very, very significant. In closing, I hope this session will be a fruitful opportunity to all the participants, and thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you very much, Mr. Okuda. Now we would like to invite Professor Takeuchi, the president of IGES. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Koji, for your introduction. As already introduced, I'm Kazuhiko Takeuchi, the president of IGES. I would like to say a few words at the opening of this very important session, discussing about the synergy between the climate change and biodiversity and the role of SATOYAMA Initiative in achieving these two global challenges. Let me start by explaining about the global challenges that we are aiming to achieve this year to 2030, and then ultimately by the year 2050. If you look at the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, all global communities are aiming to achieve the remarkable progress by the year 2030. And we already started to discuss about the post-2030 SDGs on the global scale. And also, we are talking about the implementation of the Paris Agreement, and we raise our ambitions to get net zero in terms of greenhouse gas emissions by the year 2050. In order to realize this net zero by the year 2050, we need to make a remarkable progress by the year 2030. And with regard to the biodiversity discussions, soon will be organized in Montreal, the COP 15 to determine the global biodiversity target after 2020. And now we are aiming to achieve the no net loss by 2030 and hopefully net gain by the year 2050. So these, all the global issues are very much interrelated, and therefore we need to take an integrated approach to climate, biodiversity, and other global challenges. And we also need to consider the green recovery from the COVID-19 crisis. And we are now encouraged to combine this green recovery with the global challenges that we are facing. This is a relationship between the biodiversity and climate change. Unfortunately, until now, biodiversity discussion has been separately discussed with the climate change discussion. But currently, global community recognize the importance of combining these two global challenges, climate and biodiversity goals, which are mutually supportive. And therefore, we need to consider that the climate, biodiversity, and human well-being to be coupled systems. And therefore, the integrated approach needs to be further addressed the global community, not only to take an integrated action, but also to give us an overview of our sustainable society in the future. And in the biodiversity discussion, we are aiming to achieve the net positive by the year 2050. In order to do that, we are aiming to achieve no net loss by the year 2030. And at this moment, we are still in the trend of decreasing the biodiversity on the global scale. And therefore, we need to stop the loss of biodiversity during this 10 years. And this 10 years is called as a decisive decade in order to achieve the global sustainability. And draft post-2020 global biodiversity framework mentioned that we need to stabilize the trend of biodiversity loss by the year 2030 and to get the biodiversity gain of 20% by 2050. And we are also need to develop the overarching objective of actions under the Convention on Biological Diversity, UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, particularly the Paris Agreement, and the UN CCD, combating desertification, and the 4 SDGs. SATOYAMA Initiative is particularly important on the local scale. And this is the concept of the circulating and the ecological sphere we propose at the Japan's 5th Basic Environment Plan, where we propose to create a strong linkage between the urban and rural areas and to create the nature-based society, resource circulating society, as well as the decarbonized society. And this idea has been implemented in Japan, but we are also willing to expand this idea to the other part of the world, particularly in Southeast Asia and in South Asia. And this aims to maximize the use of local products and also try to establish sound relationship between the multiple regions by creating networks. And it also aims to localize the SDGs, which takes an integrative approach to the environmental, social, and economic challenges, and to contribute to solve the local problems on energy, mobility, disaster, sustainable lifestyles, and so on. And SATOYAMA Initiative will contribute to establish this type of rather circulating and ecological spheres. And hope that today's discussion will contribute to further develop and also expand the scope of the SATOYAMA Initiative, which will turn into the second phase after the 2020. Originally, SATOYAMA Initiative aimed to be continued by the year 2020, but with the financial support of the government of Japan, we could further continue this SATOYAMA Initiative in our next phase. And I hope that this initiative will further contribute to the global challenges, integrated challenges that we need to accomplish. Thank you very much. And I hope everybody could enjoy the discussion today.
Thank you very much, Professor Takeuchi. Now we would like to move on to the framing of this session. So as Mr. Okuda introduced, SDM, SATOYAMA Development Mechanism, is one of the collaborative activities of the IPSI. And it is a financing mechanism to facilitate implementation of activities. We have supported about 59 projects since 2013 to realize societies in harmony with nature. If you are interested, please check this, our SDM website. We drop the link to this website on the chat box. And you can also check the different projects in this website. So as you must be aware, we have been facing environmental crisis. So Intergovernmental Panel on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services or IPBES in short, published global assessment in 2019. According to the report, about 25% of animal and plant species groups, or 1 million species, are threatened with extinction. And many of these will become extinct in the next few decades if appropriate action is not taken. Therefore, our societal values and behaviors are the fundamental factors, and we are expected to take urgent actions in a transformative way. According to the first draft of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, itself has been built around the theory of change and in requiring us to take urgent policy actions at all scales and transform economic, social, and financial models to stabilize the trend of biodiversity loss by 2030. IPBES also published a methodological assessment this year. We call it values assessment in short. In this assessment, our market has valued the overexploitation of short-term profit and economic growth, leading to the unsustainable use of nature. As you can see in this figure, the blue ones, like expensive furniture, attractive for tourists, or cut it down to build something from trees, tend to be seen as short-term profits. However, trees has various values, not only short-term profitable things. For example, some culture regard it as sacred tree, or trees can prevent soil erosion, purify air, provide habitat space for various species, a beautiful scenery. Trees have various values, but we tend to look at the profitable way, like just look at the short-term profits. So this values assessment is guiding us to look at the broad values, broad knowledge system, including indigenous local knowledge. In this way, we can obtain the sustainable aligned values. To do so, we are expected to make sectoral policies coherent, and also we are expected to empower civil society and change societal structures and institutions. It is also important to enhance the capacity of decision makers to address these kind of conflicting and or contradictory values. So we need to learn and to think what values is sustainability aligned. The value assessment is also discussing how the policy uptake can happen. So valuation is considered useful since it can make the various values of nature visible. So to make policy uptake happen, it's important to involve community and also co-manage protect areas or co-design valuation, such as payment for ecosystem services with local communities. And from other studies, scientists are expected to reduce uncertainty and make it clear for the policy or decision makers. And it is also important to increase public engagement practitioners. Therefore, today we'd like to invite two presenters from our SDM projects. First one is from South Asian Forum for Environment, SAFE in short. SAFE is going to introduce the case from India. And the other one is from National Donghua University from Chinese Taipei. These were recently completed their projects. And after their presentations, we like to discuss these questions in the Q&A sessions. We also like to welcome questions from the audience. If you have have any questions to us, you can put your question on the Q&A command. Our time is limited, so we may not be able to take up all the questions, but we will do our best. So now I'd like to invite Dr. Dipayande. The floor is yours, Dipayan.
Yeah, thank you, Cozy. And this is really a wonderful opportunity to talk to the audience, the esteemed audience. And I would just like to start up with the very important topics, strengthening synergies between climate change and biodiversity. And that is what we did in our project. And we could link science to policy and to action. So I hope the screen is visible. The main purpose of this particular project was just to put the indigenous community-led conservation and restoration in the governance of the communities in a socio-ecological production landscape, which is situated in Arunachal Pradesh. So this is just a scenario of the SEPL, that is the socio-ecological production landscape of Arunachal Pradesh. The location of it is just sandwiched between China and India, and it's a community-governed forest-led, production landscape where Japanese varieties of rice are still being cultivated as no-tillage, climate-resilient varieties. And the location is shared over here. The area is around 8,500 hectares, and the agroecology is dry upland rice. So we also get maize and millet, but for the climate change impacts, wet valley rice has also been introduced, and the unique biodiversity of the area, which definitely includes the local agro biodiversity, is also in a condition threatened, I would like to say, because the most important, the black-necked cranes, Grus nigricollis, which used to rooster the winter roosting in these paddy fields, were not getting their feed during the winter roosting period. So we started the study and we tried to locate the demography where 12 indigenous communities were present in the small hamlets, and the land use, land pattern practices we also studied. Mainly rice, millet, and maize were spread over almost 68 to 70% of the land. The economy was entirely agrarian economy, and the community was ultra poor, having a per capita income of nearly $85 per month, which is very, very low. But even then, they were thriving in the socio-ecological production landscape. So this is the Sangti Valley landscape, where you can see this is locally called as the red rice, and this is a Japanese variety, Oryza japonica. And on these fields, the birds rooster. So this is the thrashing site, and these are the beautiful birds that used to come in these valleys. But interestingly, what happened is they have developed a lot of climate resilient practices in this socio-ecological production landscape, like sun drying, mulching, and farming in the fields in a different ways. But the most important thing is that the women were very much engaged in this, and the entire system of production was women-led. Climate change and certain policy changes put everything into a stalwart condition, and we found that the government has introduced a free rice scheme, especially during the COVID period. But that led to the non-production of these red rices, which further led to the very bad impact that the black-necked cranes were not visiting these crop fields. So finally, the local economy was at stake and the youth started migrating. Our objective was mainly to bring it back to its original stature, so that the socio-ecological production landscape is well, contained within the communities, and the communities can sustain even in the challenges of the climate change. So what we did is we took a three-pronged action that we trained the local people to make the local agro practices more resilient and brought back the local agro biodiversity, especially the red rice, so that the birds can come back. And we also introduced some very interesting small farm, say family farm level interventions, like local millets where no tillage is needed. That is a resilient crop. Some nutrition family farming, or we also produce some storage crops that can sustain in the lean period of the climates. And the impacts were good. Nearly 17.5 hectares of arable land was brought back into red rice farming. And we developed self-help groups with the women and restored the habitat with these activities in that particular socio-ecological production landscape. We got a number of policy implications wherein the ministers and the main stakeholders took it as a case study, as an exemplary case study, and we presented it to different forum, international forum like the Nairobi Work Program of UNFCCC, Asia Pacific Adaptation Network, Global Development Network of World Bank, and also in COP27. I've just shared a screenshot of the webinar going on in COP27. And this was also covered widely in the national and print media, where this particular, say, activity or three-pronged action, like giving technology, strengthening the local, the groups, and also bringing back the agrobiodiversity into its place. This was widely covered in the national media, and we got some responses. But I think there are miles to go, because this is just a small socio-ecological production landscape. And if we see the entire South and Southeast Asian countries, they have innumerable such socio-ecological production landscape. So from Northeast India, if we just spread around the Hindu Kush Himalayas, where we have the tribal, the indigenous communities, and the whole of South Asia, I think this translates from nearly 12 indigenous communities with a populace of 0.87 million to a whole lot of 683 indigenous communities with around 93 million populace. So we can understand to what extent it can impact the resilience against climate change impacts, and how we can strengthen the communities together. So this is a very unique thing, and we are very much obliged and very much thankful to the SDM Secretariat to support this small project. But we definitely feel that this will scale up, and we would lead it to entire South and Southeast Asian countries. So this is the Buddhist area, and they were praying for the better crops. And this is the socio-ecological production landscape presenting before you. So thank you very much for this opportunity. And I would like to request you for more questions on this. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Dipayan, for sharing the very meaningful and interesting project with us. Now we'd like to move on to the next presentation from National Donghua University. Professor Lee, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Minasan konnichiwa. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for inviting me and my colleague, Dr. Polina Karimova, to share with you a topic about resilience assessment in SEPOS and its policy uptake through activities by Taiwan Partnership for the SATOYAMA Initiative, TIPSI. Next, please. Our talk includes 3 parts, and I will introduce the part 1, the Taiwan Partnership for the SATOYAMA Initiative. And Polina will talk about the part 2 and 3, SDN 2020 project, and the policy undertake based on the SDN project. Next, please. Part 1. Next. Yeah, sorry, yes. Why we set up a TIPSI? Taiwan is a small island with high population density, and we have many environmental and social economic challenges faced by SEPOS. And in 2011, the SATOYAMA Initiative was introduced to Taiwan and soon gains high popularity, and many inspiring case studies had been developed. However, we also face with the lack of comprehensive policy, knowledge enhancement, and capacity building mechanism, and experience sharing and learning from good SATOYAMA practices. Therefore, from about 2015, we set up TIPSI as a solution, and TIPSI provides as an integrated approach to setting up a national strategic framework for promoting the SATOYAMA Initiative in Taiwan. Next, please. Next, please.
Just a second, Professor, it's a bit slow.
Oh, yes, thank you. Yeah, the diagrams spell the TIPSI strategic framework. It includes 2 action targets and the 5 types of activities as shown in the diagram. And it helps us to work on think global, adapt national, act local, 3 important levels of action. And since 2015, the Forestry Bureau, Council of Agriculture Taiwan, provide financial and institutional support through the network of 8 district offices of the Forestry Bureau. And since 2018, a Taiwan Ecological Network project, including phase 1 and 2, provide very important and higher levels legal instrument for effective implementation. And so far, we have more than 200 organizations participating in the TIPSI network. Next, please. And Act Local has been always at the heart of the TIPSI activities. And there are 4 regional exchange bases in the north, west, southeast part of Taiwan. And each year, they conduct TIPSI regional workshops to promote capacity building and on-the-ground activities and exchange of practical experiences and solutions to common challenges. And each year we have a specific things for the activities, including revitalization of SEPO, regional national networking, youth participation, SEPO resilience and biodiversity, marketing, and ecosystem connectivities. Next, please. Okay, part 2. Paulina, please.
Professor, thank you so much for this amazing introduction. So now, and of course, good day to all of you, dear participants. So now I'll move on to part 2 of our presentation and talk about the project itself. And first of all, let's just think, why was this resilience assessment necessary? So Professor has introduced that 5 years into TIPSI, we've observed some amazing experience exchange, learning opportunities, and a growing network of practitioners. However, what we observed as well was a lack of a very comprehensive and in-depth understanding of how our SAPLs were actually doing and what we could do better. It was relevant to what kind of weaknesses, what kind of strengths we had in our SAPLs, what kind of management practices could we improve, and how could all of this be more relevant to our national biodiversity conservation policy, Taiwan Ecological Network. So this is where the idea for our project came from. But you may also wonder, why resilience and why assessment of resilience? So I would invite us to take a step back for a moment and to take a look at our pilot case study, which is located in Hsinchu in eastern coastal Taiwan, and it's on my beautiful background. It's a very classic example of an integrated landscape and seascape approach, which has its own multi-stakeholder platform. It's based on the 5 perspectives of the SATOYAMA Initiative, and it also has an adaptive co-management cycle going on. But what's very important in our case is that resilience assessment workshops have been used as a monitoring and evaluation tool throughout the whole process. So we learned from IPSI and localized 20 indicators of resilience in sepals and adapted them to Sinshua sepal specifics. And we also realized that the results of this exercise could be easily integrated into our management practices, such as design and adjustment of our action plans. So the workshops themselves is a community-based activity. So it's usually one workshop per one perspective. And what was really unique in this exercise is that we used the concept of health. So as humans need to conduct health check to know how healthy we are, what kind of diseases we have, how to cure them. So in sepals, doing resilience assessment is very similar. So by learning from all of these experiences in our pilot case study, we decided to introduce them to 8 more sepals. Why 8, you may wonder? As Professor has introduced, we've got 8 district offices within the Forestry Bureau. So each district office selected a community they wanted to understand better, to know the resilience of. And so this is what they looked like. As you may see from the map, these are very diverse ecosystem types, very diverse socio-cultural backgrounds, production activities, which was quite exciting. So the project itself started off from publications and learning materials, in particular this practical guidebook for communities and facilitators. And it has consisted of 2 phases so far. So the first phase was SDM itself, which took place last year. So we trained our facilitating teams and they went out to the fields to conduct the workshops. And this year we've been working on integration of these results and experiences into local ACMs. And of course, sharing ideas, experiences, and next steps. On this slide, we're just presenting some photos for you to get an understanding of what workshops look like. So each case study, first of all, localized the indicators, then conducted the workshops, communicated the results to all relevant stakeholders, and now they're working on the next steps, which is designing of action plans, application for relevant projects and funding, and so on and so forth. As you may imagine, such diverse sepals, of course, have diverse risks and resources, and this data is still being curated by our teams. However, we have also observed some very common risks and resources. For instance, underuse of natural resources or threat from conventional agriculture or marketing difficulties are very common for many sepals in Taiwan. But we also know that such resources as evidence-based biodiversity monitoring, for example, or payments for ecosystem services, or even promotion of rural-urban connectivity as a CES concept have a very high potential on the island. So now, knowing all this, the interesting question is, what is the policy uptake potential in this post-2020 decade? So here we start off from looking at our successes. So as you may have noticed, it has been a systematic nationwide simultaneous assessment of resilience in sepals. And it was carried out and supported by the government agency, our Forestry Bureau, which is extremely unique. It was an amazing learning model from sepals to sepals, and also a capacity building effort where TIPSI has played a major role. But we also recognize our challenges. Pretty much, where do we go from here? Like at a local scale, for example, how can these results of assessment be useful for ACM processes on the ground, and how can they help our communities? At a national scale, how can we feed them into our national policy, which is Taiwan Ecological Network, so all sepals on the island can actually benefit from this experience? And of course, at a regional or global scale, can these experiences be useful to you, our dear participants? Can they be applicable, replicable in some way? So in other words, what is the transformative potential of this exercise? So for this purpose, by learning from the first draft of Global Biodiversity Framework and Theory of Change, early last year, we published a paper on post-2020 transformative change framework for the SATOYAMA Initiative in Taiwan. So we applied it to our Taiwanese context. This is its Chinese version, and this is translation in English. So we started off from looking at 2050 vision of living in harmony with nature and what it means for our sepals here in Taiwan. So as 2030 goals and 2025 milestones would be our 5 perspectives of the SATOYAMA Initiative. And as Professor Takeuchi has mentioned, if we want to achieve a nature positive society by 2030, of course, we need to follow this mission of managing and connecting resilient sepals and also mainstreaming the value. So here, TIPSI will be playing the main role as an institutional arrangement. And we recognize that a number of supporting conditions would be necessary, which include collaborative governance and landscape seascape approaches, policy and legal arrangement, which is our Taiwan Ecological Network, and what is particularly relevant today is monitoring and evaluation mechanism, which we will be basing on the concept of resilience, addressing our risks and enhancing our resources, and of course, by using assessment of resilience as a monitoring and evaluation tool for Taiwan Ecological Network. So this is our final slide. We would just like to talk in a bit more detail. What does this framework mean, maybe in practical application in the next years to come? What are the policy uptake opportunities? So by becoming the main monitoring and evaluation tool in our SAPLs, we are planning to conduct follow-up workshops in our initial communities and also baseline workshops in 8 more communities. So as you may see, by 2025, we're expecting to have 16 SAPLs, which resilience will have been assessed. And again, SAPLs to SAPLs experience exchange will be extremely important, and even potentially maybe self-assessment. So maybe at some point it won't be facilitators or NGOs or academia coming in to help assess the resilience, but the communities would be able to do this themselves. It's also about ensuring our coherence between our social and ecological objectives. So we're hoping to have this cross-mapping of priority biodiversity areas and conservation corridors, which has been conducted as a part of Taiwan Ecological Network, and the locations of our SAPLs. So this way we can know how well are we achieving our biodiversity and livelihood objectives. Again, it's also about creating a digital database. So all of this information on indicators, risks, resources, our experiences with ACM uptake, we're hoping for it to be available, to be shared and taken up by other practitioners, so they don't have to reinvent the wheel every single time they begin a project. And of course, we're talking about a cross-scale and cross-sectoral cooperation of government agencies, which is within the Forestry Bureau network itself, from the very on-the-ground working stations to district offices all the way to headquarters. It's within one ministry, which is the Council of Agriculture, and also across several ministries. So how can we work with water resources, economic, transportation, cultural, and other sectors? So this is it for our presentation. We thank you very much for your attention, and we particularly acknowledge support from IGES and IPSI and our Forestry Bureau for this amazing project. And of course, to all of our TIPSI partners who are still working very hard in making this transformative dream possible. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Professor Lee and Dr. Paulina. It was a very interesting project, and then thank you for sharing those results with us. And it was very interesting that how SATOYAMA Initiative Taiwan has been successfully established and then established the national network. And they are applying resilience indicator, which is also one of the methods to make a valuation happen. In that way, policymakers can easily understand what kind of values SATOYAMA area has. So now we'd like to move on the Q&A session. We have about 10 minutes. So I'm like to share the question on the screen again. So okay, so now we like to invite all these 3 speakers, and then we like to discuss all these questions. So first, we want to please look at the first questions, and we like to ask you, do you have any examples that from your project side that you could make production and consumption relationship turn into nature positive? So it might be nature negative previously, but through your CEPOS approach and so on, how could you manage it? How could you achieve it? How could make people know about not only short-term profits, but also long-term profits? So Dr. Dipan, do you have any ideas?
Yeah, yeah, this is a very interesting part, because when we started working in this SEPL, the production consumption relationship was very uneven. There were huge consumption demands for the cereals, but the local production was so less. So they were getting the materials from outside, and the local biodiversity was falling back. So what we intended to do rather, that the SEPL should sustain in itself with the local agrobiodiversity. And so we trained the people so that the production of local agrobiodiversity can be increased a little bit, like the red rice, as I said. We also trained them that the locally made food is more nutritive. So nutritional farming system in the families added to this. And at the same time, we started developing entrepreneurship so that these locally produced materials can also be supplied outside, even in a small volume, but with a high value, so that the local economy can be sustained. So that is how we wanted to bring it back to the nature positive scenario, and it is gaining momentum.
Thank you for sharing your successful case. So how about any example from your project, Professor Lee or Paulina?
Yeah. Not only one example, I think almost every site of TIPC, production consumption relationship management, is the key things for moving towards a nature positive society. So based on our experience in Taiwan, local and indigenous community, they usually start with some specific tasks based on their concerns and needs to work on the SATOYAMA Initiative. These concerns can be biodiversity conservation, traditional cultural transfer, young people livelihoods, and so on. And through a multiple stakeholder cooperation process, a local community can usually see and be happy with their short-term outcome. For example, biodiversity enhancement through ecologically friendly farming, even though it is not so profitable in the beginning in terms of the income. But soon later, they found they need more. They need to also work on processing and marketing the agricultural products, revitalization of their traditional culture and knowledge, working on ecotourism and green tourism to enhance their social and economic benefits. So during this later stage, the management of producer-consumer relationship, especially a new rural and urban symbiotic relationship, just as the example mentioned by Professor Takeuchi, Japan's regional circulating ecological sphere. This kind of work become very crucial to the success. So with the help of the new relationship, local community can have a greater opportunity for moving towards a more comprehensive aspect of a nature positive society and resilient society. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Lee. And thank you for bringing up not only environmental aspect, but also social and cultural aspect. These are also very important to make society sustainable. And so now we'd like to move on to the second one. So how did you, or do you plan to facilitate decision makers to take up your project results? So now we are facing the issue that there's a gap between knowledge and actions. Although we have produced so much knowledge about environmental issues and the value of nature, but still it's not reflected in policies or actions. So in this regard, do you have any examples or cases from your project, Deepayan?
Yes, I think what Professor Lee was just telling, that the socioecology is very much linked with the culture. So when we thought of putting it into the decision-making system, the first thing we did is to make it in a two-way traffic. The first one was with the local decision makers, like these are all indigenous communities, and at the village level, there is a very strong local segment, those who make the decisions for the village. So we talked about their culture, their nutritional habits, their old, say, rituals, wherein the agrobiodiversity or the practices or the production landscape remains very important. So that was a bit of a sentimental or an emotional approach to the local people, and they took it very instantaneously. So that was a situation where we could translate this. But for the decision-making system at the national level or even at the state level, we definitely produce certain papers, certain publications. We approach the media who could cover the case studies. And another very interesting thing we did with the facilitation from Asia Pacific Network for Global Change Research, Japan, that we started a project which started pricing the ecosystem services. So we were trying to approach the decision makers that if we can put the price of that ecosystem service, the value of that ecosystem service before them, probably they will be, say, interested in conserving it, because it directly implies to the GDP of the nation. So in 2 or 3 workshops, it came up like they were interested, and they took it up as a case study from the government side also, so that that can be scaled up. So these are the small efforts that we could take, but yes, it's giving some result at both the levels.
Thank you, Deepayan, for bringing up the local knowledge, or indigenous or local knowledge, and then trying to make a linkage between policymakers and the local communities. So how about the cases from
Yeah, sure. Koji, thank you so much. Yeah, I'll just take this question. I think this question is quite direct in our case. When we talk about decision makers being involved in the project results, we had decision makers, our forestry bureau and district offices, involved from the very beginning, from the very start of the project and throughout the whole project. So this has never been, a challenge, to have our decision makers involved. And this is quite an amazing experience, because it's the first time we had a government agency itself being involved in the assessment this way. But I think a big question is, how do we move on from here? And how can we enhance, this involvement of stakeholders in the future? And, in response to this question, I don't know if it's possible to present it here. I just drew up like a very simple picture. I'll try to explain it briefly. I think it's stakeholder engagement at 3 levels. So the first level, I call it internal, how do I call it? Oh, internal level within CEPOLS itself. So it would mean engagement of local stakeholders. So it's not only our core CEPOLS members, who always cooperate with us, participate in all these activities, but it's also other community members who may be currently a bit outside of the process. So involving them, engaging them, so having this community and coherence within the communities itself. So it's also about engagement of migrant youth, who comes back to our CEPOLS. So this is the very internal level. The second one would be external horizontal level. So it's cooperation between these various CEPOLS. So now we've got this resilience assessment experience. Now we know these risks and resources. So how can one CEPOLS share its experiences with another one? So this is why it's like horizontal. So we have like this extrapolation of experiences. And the third level would be external vertical, as I call it. So it's engagement with all other relevant stakeholders. And of course, that would be government agencies, funders, maybe private companies. So by understanding the risks now and knowing the gaps, how can our communities reach out to the right stakeholders, to the right agencies, apply to the projects that really fit them. So I think this would be quite important as the next step. And just the last point, it was pointed out by one of our communities. They said, we need to let everybody understand what is the value of our efforts. So I think it relates to everything: internal, external, horizontal, vertical arrangements, the value of what we do. And hopefully this is what we'll work on in the future. Yeah. Thank you, Coach.
Thank you, Paulina, for sharing your experiences. That's very excellent to involve different stakeholders from the local level to national level. So we are running out of time, but just quickly, we'd like to ask you the last questions. So we have only 7 years till 2030, but it's very challenging. But how can you manage to accelerate changes to make nature positive society happen by 2030? Do you have just, can you give us a quick comment, Dipayan?
Definitely, it's a big challenge, but I think one important thing to accelerate is to scale up in different, contrasting agroecologies. And the second important thing is we need to add on, green business or green skill development features with this, so that, by 2030, though in India, I do not think it's very possible, but definitely we can take small steps to reach to this. These are my small inputs, maybe.
Thank you, Dipayan. Sorry for making you rush. So anything from Professor Leopoldina?
Yeah, as we mentioned, in Taiwan, TIPSI plays an important role to accelerate the change. It starts from 2015 to the present, based on mainly local people, indigenous community, their interests, concerns, and facilitated by academia, NGOs, NPOs, and supported by the government. And I think the big challenge and also the achievement about the cross-sector and cross-scale efforts. And therefore, in Taiwan, the Taiwan Ecological Network projects provide a very important enabling environment support to the TIPSI activities. And as we mentioned, he has finished the phase 1 from 2018 to 21. Now we are working on the phase 2 from 2022 to 25. I think we need phase 3 to work on more years to achieve the goal by 2020. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Lee. And so we are almost, our time is limited. And then so we apologize for the audience who gave us some questions, but we could not address in this session. But we are going to produce an issue brief based on this session, and we will make it published. And you can find our products from our SDN website, and you can go to you can see our products. And I hope we could learn a lot from these 2 cases from India and Taiwan. And at last, we'll like to invite closing remark from Tsunao Watanabe. We received a recording from him. He's the director of the Secretariat of the International Partnership for the SATOYAMA Initiative.
Distinguished participants, on behalf of the Secretariat of the International Partnership for the SATOYAMA Initiative, IPSH, I'm pleased to deliver these closing remarks. We are now seeing unprecedented and interrelated environmental crises posing significant threats to human health and our society. such as biodiversity loss and climate change. This means that we are at a critical moment to determine our future. Whether we continue business as usual and cause irreparable destruction of nature, or we set ambitious goals and rebuild a healthy relationship between nature and people. Our future absolutely depends on us. The Kunming Declaration adopted in Part 1 of CBD COP15 last year stressed that urgent and integrated action is needed for transformative change across all sectors of the economy and all parts of society through policy coherence at all levels of government. From the 7th of December, Part 2 of COP15 will take place in Montreal to adopt the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. It will set global goals and targets to facilitate the conservation and restoration of nature by 2030. To not repeat the shortfall of the H biodiversity targets, we must act now and advance fundamental transformations in our social and economic models and make decisive progress in the coming years. For that, it is essential to implement effective strategies and actions at the local level, engaging local stakeholders, including indigenous people and local communities, while deepening a mutual understanding. It has been more than a decade since IPSH was launched in 2010. The partnership has been consistently growing. It started with 51 member organizations and now has 292. It is a great pleasure to see our members increasing their efforts across the globe to promote the conservation and restoration of biodiversity and the sustainable use of natural resources. Case studies implemented through the SATOYAMA development mechanism offer informative guidance on how policy uptake is possible at the local level and what challenges need to be addressed for wider implementation. I believe that today's presentations are very valuable for all the participants and will encourage them to take further action. Regardless of whether you are a policymaker or an on-the-ground practitioner, a sustainable and resilient world cannot be achieved without collaborative efforts beyond sectors and among multi-stakeholders. It is again up to us to determine what kind of future we would like to shape and whether or not we can achieve it. I strongly believe that we can make the coming decades a decisive one. Let's act together to realize a society in harmony with nature. Lastly, I would like to thank IGES for their organizing this session and all the speakers. I would also like to express special thanks to the Ministry of the Environment of Japan for their ongoing financial support for our work on the SATOYAMA Initiative. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Watanabe. So we have almost reached the end of the session. So we really like to thank you, all of you, for joining our session. And so we have one more session today in about in 1 hour. And we also have 3 more sessions on the 5th of December. So we are looking forward to seeing you in those sessions or next ISAP. And before completely closing out this session, we'd like you to cooperate with us to answering our survey. So after changing the screen, the survey will show up on your screen. So please fill in the survey, which will be helpful for us to improve our future session. So for now, I'd like to thank you, all of you, and then bye to the next time. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.